But how they tee that off, they actually use that right away. In Scripture, there's no longer referencing to the gifts after 1 Corinthians. So after 1 Corinthians, they say there's really no miracles or anything like that
that's
exists.
a bogus argument,
Right.
because Corinthians was written before Ephesians, and Ephesians talks about the gifts.
That's right.
So you can't really use this chronological argument, because the real topic of the day is, do they exist or not?
That's right.
And if they don't, what indication do we have that they've ceased, regardless of the chronology?
Right. And what would make a person put in the canon something about spiritual gifts and not even be able to use them? It's like saying, man, why would you put that in Scripture and teach it as a teachable thing and then say, but you can't use these? Does that make sense?
It does, but let's go to some more of their substantialized argument. Right. One of those substantialized arguments is Sola Scriptura, the sufficiency of Scripture. We don't need any more revelation from God. We have all the Scripture we're going to get. Everything that God has spoken is now spoken. It's in these canonized letters that we now use as a reference. That's a great argument, and I completely believe in the sufficiency of Scripture. Why? Because it's that Scripture that tells me there's continuing prophetic word, and there's tongues, and there's ongoing revelation. So if you're going to tell me that the Scripture is sufficient in what it currently is as the canonized New Testament, I'm going to agree with you, but I'm going to say it is that canonized Scripture that you're depending on and I'm depending on that tells us the gifts continue.
I think, and especially to your point, when we take the bird's eye view, and that's something that I explain a lot of times to people, is people get so in the weeds with Scripture that they lose the forest, right? They lose the forest for the trees. If you take a bird's eye view of Scripture, what does Scripture talk about repeatedly in terms of the gifts, right? So we look at 1 Corinthians especially, and I was looking for this for a reason. You want to know why I couldn't find that Scripture? Because I was thinking it was in 1 Corinthians 14. It's in 13. Before he starts talking about the procedure of prophecy, before he starts training them on prophecy. So if prophecy wasn't going to be around for a while, why would you start with, hey, at some point this will disappear in like 30 years, but let me tell you how to use it completely. So the problem that people make is they make the assumption that, oh, well, if I can turn this way, then it should mean this. Well, let's look back and go, where are the substantial, clear, powerful Scriptures saying all of this is going to be done away with as soon as the apostles are done on the stage? It's not there. No. But we have plenty of training in how to continue in the gifts, especially to the regular church.
I would even go one step past that. The most difficult thing for the cessationist to deal with is the fact that there is no Scripture ever that says the gifts will cease.
Right.
There's never a time frame set. There's never, like I said, the Corinthians about the perfect, and we know that to be Christ now. We know that not to be the canonized Scripture. And I believe in Hebrews it wasn't 7 times it said it, but we have the perfecter of our faith, and Jesus as the perfect. But my point is, if you're going to use that argument and say that Scripture does not say that it's going to cease, the opposite is true, and that's the problem.
Right.
The Scripture clearly, definitively, without doubt says they will continue. They will go on. Nothing that says there's ever a point where they're going to cease, but definitive Scripture. Can I cover one?
Yes.
Okay, I can get riled up real quick on this.
No,
okay.
we got hours. No. Let's go. We're going to do this in 3 parts, I'm sure.
Multiple Scriptures desire the gifts, earnestly desire them, especially with prophesy. But I want you to listen to this one, and let's dissect the Scripture a little bit. I'm in Mark, and I'm in Mark chapter 16, and we're down to the Great Commission Scripture. And I just want you to hear Jesus is talking to his disciples, and this is what he said. He said to them, verse 15, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation."
It stopped right there. There's no more after that. That's what they believe. No, the rest of what he said doesn't matter.
Now watch. "He who has believed and has been baptized will be saved, and he who has disbelieved will be condemned." 17. "These signs will accompany those who have believed." Now hear me out. The cessationist argument is
Scrubbing that.
only that
gonna scrub that.
the apostles and the disciples are the foundational period at that time, had these giftings, and they went away.
That's one of their arguments.
Right. But consider what this says. If this is only speaking to the foundational generation, then what he would be saying is these are the signs that accompany those that teach it. You. These will be the signs of you so that someone else can believe. Why
that's
would
it.
he be saying to you,
That's right.
you will be able to speak in tongues if you can speak in tongues?
Right. So what they said in that video, just to affirm what you're saying, because I want you to continue with this, what they said was that the gifts were given to men to affirm their calling and that people would know that they were sent of God. That's it.
Right.
So only the apostles had this gift.
Right.
Only the apostles and the prophets in the past had this gift. And then because they used a scripture from Elijah when he went and healed the young man who was dead, and the mother said to him, to Elijah, he goes, or she says, now I know that you're sent of God and that you speak his truth. So they said, see, there it is. It's clear. Only the gifts were given to the apostles and the prophets because that affirmed who they were in God.
Agreed. But here's what I agreed about their argument.
Right. So
Here's what I'm
passing to
saying
you.
about this scripture. Why would Jesus be looking at the very people who can speak in tongues and say, this will be the sign that you believe that you speak in tongues? Because if you stop believing, it'll be you don't speak in tongues anymore. And that's how we'll know you can no longer share the gospel because you stop believing because you can't speak in tongues. So he's not saying you are the one who will speak in tongues. He's saying you share the gospel. Watch this. 16, he who has believed. 17, these signs will accompany those who have believed. Ooh. So he's saying it's the person you're sending the gospel to that will believe, and these will be the signs that accompany them. In my name, they will cast out demons. They'll speak with new tongues. There's your giftings, okay? Right. So my point is he can't be talking about the apostles and disciples or even the first century. He's saying who you share the gospel with, they will be able to do it. He's not saying you're the one who believes so you can speak in tongues. And by the way, if you quit believing, you won't be able to speak in tongues anymore. He's saying who you share the gospel with, the ones who believe will be able to speak in tongues. Now, let's go back to the argument you made earlier. Does that mean that they're never going to cease? Well, it's unfathomable to me to send the apostles and the disciples out with this message of the gospel and say whoever believes is going to be able to speak in tongues, but that is at any point going to fade away, and he doesn't tell them that.
Right. that's
like you're sharing the gospel and these people are starting to speak in tongues, and then one day you're sharing the gospel and people aren't speaking in tongues. And according to the cessationists, that can only be one of two things. John died or the scriptures got canonized. Boom. It just happened. It just happened. John died, so now we can no longer speak in tongues.
Someone is raising from the dead, and he's like, I'm here. And
Sorry.
Sorry.
oh, you're getting healed. Oh, there it goes. Or the angel comes down. Jim, stop. Stop, Jim. Stop. You're done. It's over. It's over, dude.
I think
just quit.
That's the point, is if there were a stopping point, it would have had to have been identified in some way. In the Strange Fire Conference years ago, there was an argument made of the diminishment of miracles in the New Testament. In other words, you start out in the book of Acts, and obviously you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John where Jesus is performing miracles. And then you get to Acts and there are miracles that happen. And then as you go on, there's less and less miracles through the book of Jude. And so their argument was, you can see they're already fading away. Here's the problem with that. In the very beginning, in the book of Acts, you have all of these baptisms that happen, thousands of baptisms. Then you just have Cornelius' family, and then you just have the Ethiopian eunuch. And as you go there, so is baptism going away?
Salvation going away?
Because there's less and less of them recorded in Scripture. It's a bad argument. That's my point. You don't argue a bad argument because once somebody pops it, you're done. All of your arguments fall apart because you've made a bad one. So make good ones or don't make them.